Hey, hopefully we're here now. I know that some people were watching before, but we did get kind of cut out there. It looks like Facebook is having some technical difficulties right now, but I am back again with Krzl, who is a teacher in Santiago, Chile. And Krzl, we're going to just kind of go over some of the questions I already asked, if that's okay with
All
you.
right. No
Perfect.
worries.
Okay, so if you don't mind just telling us a little bit about yourself, what your background is, and where you're from.
All right, no problem. I'm Krzl. I'm from the Philippines, born and bred. I grew up in a small town south of the capital, which is Manila,
Mhm.
but I lived in the capital like for almost half my life, like almost 10 years.
Great.
Currently, I live here in Chile, in Santiago, Chile, and I've been here for almost 4 years.
Wow. So were you always thinking that you were going to be a teacher, or is this something that you kind of stumbled upon?
Oh, yeah, it's amazing how, plans change and how things have changed because, I mean, I always have a plan, but maybe before I kind of felt that I would be a teacher because when I was studying in high school and the university, I had some experience teaching, teaching kids, like, for example, outreach programs or things like that. So I kind of felt that I could teach, somehow. And then when I started teaching online, I also realized that, oh, maybe, I could work as a teacher, not just in the Philippines, but probably abroad.
Nice. So you mentioned you teach online. Do you have how did you get started teaching online?
Right. So 5 years ago, my colleague told me about this institute that she worked for. Uh, it was basically a Filipino Japanese company, but they catered mostly to Japanese students who were based in Japan. So the only option at the time was to teach the students online, and they hired mostly Filipino teachers, because it's a Filipino Japanese company. And then I applied, and that was my first time teaching online. And basically, that was the start of my career as an ESL teacher as well.
Very cool. What are some of the pros and cons that you've discovered with teaching online?
Good question. Well, basically, teaching online, it's at first you would think it's quite easy because the applications are user friendly and it's easy to access them. You just need basically your computer and a good Wi-Fi connection, and you can do it anywhere. You can do it in the comfort of your home or in a quiet cafe or places like that. So that's the advantage of doing it. But on the other hand, when you teach online, it's kind of limited in the sense that you cannot do the usual, classroom activities like games, like
Right.
probably you can do some charades because you can see each other, but you cannot like run around or like, do or share materials. Your only option is share screens sometimes, or do body gestures. So it's quite challenging because you have to make it dynamic. You have to think of so many ways on how to keep your students focused.
Right.
Yeah.
So I know you mentioned before you mostly taught to adults. Did you also teach children online or?
I think I've taught some teenagers, but not really kids.
Okay, very nice. So now you're teaching in Chile. What made you want to teach in Chile?
Oh, well, when I started teaching here, which is 3 years ago, I realized that there's a huge market for English teaching here in Chile, because people here, many people here don't just want to learn English, they need to learn English, whether it's for their job or for their personal goals. So I realized that it's a good market. So, in, in terms of practicing my teaching career, it's a very good place.
Yeah, no
And
kidding.
yeah, so, I think like other teachers would agree as well.
Absolutely. So
Right.
what is maybe a recommendation you might have for someone who wants to teach in Chile specifically?
Right. Well, I think my first advice would be it's kind of necessary to learn a little bit of Spanish.
Okay.
because because I mean really because especially when you teach beginner students, there are some who will resort to translating, but as a teacher it's not necessary for you to translate, but especially for beginners, they want to understand some words through translation. So it's like they ask you something in Spanish, so you have to know what that means,
Right.
but obviously not all the time. And honestly, some students require or ask for a teacher who knows even base or at least understands Spanish, so, and well, basically when you come here, you have to communicate to locals in Spanish, so you have to learn a little bit, even just the basics.
Yeah, well, and that seems like pretty good advice. What was
Right.
maybe one of the biggest culture shocks that you had from moving from the Philippines to Chile?
Oh wow. Yeah, you know what, honestly, Filipino and Chilean cultures are not really, that different. There isn't much difference between our cultures, so it was kind of easy for me to adjust here. But if there is a culture shock that I can recognize for now, I think it's the food.
Ah.
Because for our eating habits and our meals in the Philippines are quite different, because for example, a very good example is rice. Like we eat rice for breakfast, for lunch, for dinner. And when I came here, like the first time, people here eat a lot of bread. Like they eat, I mean, we also eat bread, in the Philippines, but here they eat bread for breakfast, and like before dinner, they also have a tea time, so they eat bread like a lot. So, and I wasn't used to that. So, and but I got used to it eventually.
Yeah, I know when I was teaching in Japan, getting used to eating rice for breakfast and lunch and dinner every single day was definitely a bit of a culture shock for me. So I'm used to the bread side of things and you're used to the rice side of things.
That's very interesting. Yeah, it's a different staple.
What do you love most about teaching in Chile?
Oh, well, well, first of all, Chile is a very beautiful country. They have many beautiful landscapes. If you want to visit different places, the beach, the desert, the mountains, they've got everything. But in terms, in terms of, it's true. In terms of teaching, I think that what I like most about the city, because I teach in the city only, is that it's quite easy to get around. Like the public transportation is efficient most of the time, and it's not so complicated to go to companies or to a particular neighborhood. So it's easy to plan your trips, because especially if you're a traveling teacher like me, you really have to know where certain places are and how to get there. But it's not so complicated, so that's why I like it. And for example, I have to be I have to arrive at a certain place at a certain time, so I can calculate, and most of the time it's accurately calculated.
That's good. That's always comes in handy, especially when you have to get one place to another and you have to be on time for your lessons.
Yeah, exactly. And like another, like I think the most important thing that I like about teaching here is that my students are very motivated. Like uh, learning English for students here is basically a new experience. So it's something that they're really excited about. Like what are we gonna do today? Like what games are gonna play today? Like what words are we gonna learn today? So they're really participative and motivated, and you can see it at the start of the class. Like when you ask them about their goals, their expectations, they're like, oh, I want to improve in this and everything. I want to learn new words. So they're so excited, and you can totally teach like many things. You can talk about many things, and they will participate, and they will always be encouraged to improve.
That's awesome. And I think that makes such a huge difference when you're teaching too. It makes you as a teacher want to teach more and kind of motivate you to teach. So who are your typical students? Do you teach mostly to younger people or to older people? What kind of age or level do you teach to?
Nowadays, I'm teaching adults. So the age range for my adult students is between 25 to 6 years old. I have a 6-year-old student.
Oh, that's excellent. Good for them.
Right. Yeah, and I also teach kids, especially this year. So my students are mostly like 11 or 12-year-olds.
Okay. That's a great
Right.
age. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
they're adorable.
So what's one thing that you've learned about teaching since you started teaching? What's something that's kind of over time you now know that you maybe didn't know when you first started?
Right. Well, I've learned a lot of things really ever since I started, especially when I started teaching in the classroom. I've learned, for example, to be relaxed, like, especially the first time, because, for example, the first few classes are the most critical ones.
Sure.
So it's the time that you get to know each other. You're kind of, estimating if you're gonna if things will go well or if you will get along with your students. So but later on I learned to be relaxed. Like when I teach, like I just listen and take my time and not rush things. And I also learned to, I always have a plan, but I've learned that sometimes you have to put your plan aside and you just let the things flow. Like sometimes sometimes students just want to have a conversation about life, about their hobbies. So it's important to have a plan, but sometimes your plan doesn't go through, but you just have to go with the flow.
Yeah. And that's good advice for not just teaching. I think that's good advice for life too.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about how you benefit from being a teacher who speaks multiple language? I know we have a lot of people who are interested in teaching English, but maybe they started out speaking a different language or grew up speaking both English and Spanish or English and another language. And so that's something that we've seen a lot of people curious about is how can I use this as a teacher and how can this benefit me?
Right. Well, I think the top benefit of being a multilingual teacher is that you understand your students in some ways. Especially if you teach beginners and you know what they want to express, but they couldn't express.
Right.
So if you know how to speak their native language, it's like you also know how to kind of interpret or how to say it correctly. And also when you understand the language of another country or the language of your students, if you understand the structure or how they say this, you will recognize some mistakes and you can say, in English we don't really use this preposition, we say this.
Yeah. That makes a ton of sense. Yeah, and being able to recognize from your own experience learning English and saying, I remember when I learned this was tough, or this was something that I thought was really interesting. So that's great.
Right.
Let's see. Were there any challenges that you struggled with when you were first learning English? I know in the Philippines, it is kind of like a secondary language where you use it a lot in school and things like that. But do you remember when you were first learning it, or was that kind of pre-memory for you?
Oh, well, actually, English education in the Philippines is very good. Like I started learning English since we started learning English since we were in kindergarten, and every year we always have English subjects. And it's it's actually one of the official languages in the Philippines. So we get to practice it a lot, like in the university, in school the lectures are always in English except Filipino and other languages.
Sure.
So but if there is like a challenge, I remember in high school, like our English teacher was so strict, and we had to kind of chop the different structures of English and like put them in like a graph, and it was very technical, and I was like, why do we even have to learn this, but
Yeah.
later on it was actually helpful, because I could explain to my students like, look, this is a subject because, and this is an object because, because I learned that the hard way though.
Yeah, maybe for someone who is a bit more math minded, that would have been a really good skill to know. But it turns out, yeah, I had the same experience when I got TEFL certified. Actually, I talked about this in another video too. But when I taught abroad, grammar was a really big point. And my grammar, being a native English speaker, sometimes I forget about little clauses and gerunds and all those little things. And so I had a student who asked me about a particular part of English grammar, and I had to take a step back and say, I don't actually remember. And so luckily I had gotten certified and I had access to Grammar Advisor, and I could go back and kind of be like, oh, well, this is what it is. And that worked really well. But yeah, there's definitely things where even as a native speaker, you just kind of forget about it unless it's drilled into you with those breaking sentences apart and things like that.
Exactly. Yeah, that's true, because as native speakers just use it. Like, they don't think like how it's structured or what is the subject, and
Yeah.
what should we add at the ending, whatever. You just use it. So, but when you explain it to a learner, it's kind of challenging, because you have to know how to explain it technically and to find ways on how they can understand it better.
Yeah, okay. We're going to switch gears here real quick. I know some people were wondering, how did you find your job in Chile? Being from the Philippines, how did you come to end up in South America?
Oh, okay. Right. A good question. So, well, like 4 years ago or 5 years ago, I met a guy,
Oh.
and and then he's my boyfriend right now,
Oh.
and then so he visited me in the Philippines. Yeah, and then but that time I was thinking to myself like, well, why? I think that maybe I could go to his country, because I think I want to have a different experience, to change environments, and I want to see other parts of the world, because I love traveling. So yeah, I decided to come here 4 years ago, and then well, my first year here, I was just traveling because I wanted to get to know the country. Like I traveled to the south, to Chile, which is very beautiful. So I didn't work on my first year, and I was also waiting for my visa, because it's obligatory to work here with a visa, obviously. Right. So I was just traveling and trying to improve my Spanish, which was important. And then I tried applying around 3 years ago, but I started applying around December. But in December it was quite difficult for me, because December here is the start of summer.
Oh,
so,
yeah, that's right.
Right. So the teaching season here is between March to like November, or sometimes as early as October. Like it ends around October or November, because in December people start to to get busy and things like that. So when I applied in December, it was quite difficult for me. But when I applied again around mid-March, I found an institute, and then they were looking for teachers. So I was like, okay, yeah, this is my first job, so I'll just take any opportunity I could find. So yeah, I got the job. I had a short stint in that institute, because like from March to June. So I taught for the institute from March to June, and around mid-June I found Bridge. And it was close to one of my students' houses. So and then I found it, and I was like, oh, interesting. And then I found a job offer in a job hunter website. So, and I decided to apply, and I got accepted at Bridge.
Excellent. Well, we're glad you got accepted.
Yeah, and I think I was lucky, because and it was a very good decision, because ever since I've worked for Bridge, I've met so many people from different countries,
Oh.
and I've had a lot of students, and it's a very good environment too.
Good. Well, we're always glad to hear that. Before we let you go, was there anything else that you wanted to just let people know who maybe are out there and they're thinking that maybe they want to teach abroad, but they're not really sure? Maybe they want to teach online and they're just looking for some advice, any kind of just round out of advice that you might have.
Right. Well, I know that moving to another country, or even just living for a year in another country, sounds like a risk, or sounds like like something that you don't know what to expect, something uncertain. But I think my advice would be just do it and just go for it, because you'll never know the people that you will meet, the opportunities that you will get, and it will definitely bring you to places. Especially if you have a teaching certificate, you can work in many institutes, and you will definitely go a long way.
Perfect. Well, Krzl, thank you again so much for joining us here. I know we had some technical difficulties at the beginning, but this has been great learning more about what you do in Chile and how you got to where you are today. And so thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, you too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.